Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to begin by creating ourselves a sword, okay? And we're going to go through the entire process of creating a sword and looking at a few new techniques along the journey, as well as finally exporting it and adding it to our game as a 3D model. So to begin, we need to start off with a brand new shape, and that shape is going to be a cube. So let's create a new cube shape right here in the middle of our scene. I'm going to select that cube. I'm going to center the pivot and bring it over to 0, 0, 0. Okay, so how do we go from creating this sword from creating this cube right here into a sword? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to begin with the blade. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to create a blade shape. Now, the way a blade is normally shaped, you'll have 2 points, okay? One on the left, one on the right, and they'll form like a rhombus shape, all right? So what we need to do is we need to start off by adding in an edge loop going around vertically on our cube so that can be part of the sword. So let's go to our edge selection, select this edge right here, add in an edge loop right here. And then on these faces here, we're going to select the side faces like so. Get our scaling tool and just shrink them down to a point like so, okay? We can then move them out a tiny bit as well to get the rough profile of what our sword is going to look like, something like that. There we go. Then we can select the top faces of our sword blade and bring them up like that, all right? Something like so is probably good. And then we can get the tip of our sword set up. So for the tip of the sword, we are going to basically extrude here. So let's go extrude faces, bring that up like so, and then we pretty much want to collapse this to a point. So to do that, we are going to press R to go to the scaling tool, and if we hold on and click and drag on the white box in the center, we can hold down the control button, and what this is going to do is by default, it's going to scale in terms of units of 1. So right now the scale is at 1, but if we hold down control and drag, you'll see it snaps to 0, which is the next number nearest to 1. So we can let go, and here we have a perfect point. Now, all right, we've got our point, but a problem here is that if we go over to the Vertex Selection tool, for example, click off, click back on it, and let's just say, okay, we want to make our sword a bit higher. All right, so we'll select the top vertex here and move it up, but as you can see, there's a problem. And the problem is that before we had 2 faces, okay, and on top there were 4 different vertices that we have sort of pushed and squished together into a very, very small space, okay, to basically form our point. And the problem is that these 4 vertices are all disconnected like so, okay, so modifying the top of this sword is going to be a nightmare. So what can we do? Well, let's undo this so they are all clumped together like so. And what we're going to do is I'm going to select all of them right here by just clicking and dragging like that. Okay, we've now got them all selected so we can move it around. But the problem is that we don't always want to do that, okay? We don't want to rely on having to select all the vertices and then moving them around. So to fix this and also improve on performance, for example, if this was a model with 100 vertices collapsed together for some reason, the way we would improve the performance is by collapsing these vertices into just one. So with Vertex Selection enabled and all the vertices selected here, we can go over to our ProBuilder tools and go over to Collapse Vertices. And what Collapse Vertices does is it basically gets all of the selected vertices and sort of combines them into a single one. So let's click on that, and there we go. So now if we select this vertex again, we can move it around because it is just a single vertex at the top instead of 4 individual ones. So there we go, we've got that fixed. We can now make our blade look a bit better. Okay, we might want to select all of these edges right here and just improve on the visual part of the blade. So maybe get the scaling tool out, make this a tiny bit bigger, something like that. Okay, and there we go. That is our blade complete and ready to go. So from here, what we can do is start working on the other aspects of the sword, okay, the hilt and the handle. So what I'm going to do is just move this up here out of the way a bit, and we are going to go over, we're going to create a brand new cube shape just like before. Let's select this cube, let's where is it, center pivot, bring that over to 0, 0, 0. We'll move it up here just so we can have a look at it. We can then scale it to basically fit the rough outline of what we want. So we might also want a bit more detail in this. Okay, so let's go over to our edge selection, maybe add a edge loop along here so we can sort of taper it down a bit on the edges. So we'll add in an edge loop here. We can then select our faces on the edges right here and just scale those down like so. Okay, something like that. We might then also want to bevel the edges. So with the faces still selected, we can click bevel, and probably not bevel that large. We probably want to change this bevel to be 0.1, bevel those edges, and there you go. As you can see, we've got a bit of a smoothed edge there. In fact, let's not actually do the bevel. We'll just keep it like that for now. But of course, you can modify them in whatever way you wish. So we've got our sword, we've got our hilt. Now finally, we just need to create the handle. So for that, we're going to go create a brand new cube again. As a matter of fact, let's create a cylinder. So we'll go here, create a cylinder. We'll have 8 sides. Click build. Let's go ahead and center pivot that. Bring that to the center. We can move that up. We can then scale this shape down. Scale it up so we can actually have some verticality on this thing. And just create the rough outline of what you want the hilt to look like. Now what we're going to do is just add a little bit of detail down here at the bottom so it just doesn't end off flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge right here. I'm going to go ahead, insert an edge loop, drag that down here. We can then go ahead and select all of these faces here at the bottom. And I'm just going to make it round off here with a little bit of a place that you can rest up against. So scale that up like so. We can then extrude that down. Extrude that again and sort of collapse that in a tiny bit like so. Okay, so now that we have these 3 individual objects, we'll probably want to combine them into a single object to work with, okay? Because having to worry about moving around 3 different things is going to be a bit of a hassle. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all 3 by holding down Shift, selecting all 3 of those meshes like so. And then in the ProBuilder window, we want to go down to where we have merge objects, okay? And that does, as the name suggests, we click on that and everything is now a single object, okay? Here in the hierarchy, it is just cylinder, although we can now rename that to sword. You'll also see that our scale is a bit weird, 0.47, 2.6, 0.47 on the Z. And this is just because we've modified the scale of a bunch of different things, combined them together, so that's a bit messy. Now, the way we can normalize this is by going down to where we have freeze transform, which will basically reset everything to 0, 0, 0, okay? So we click freeze transform, and as you can see, the scale has been reset to 1, the rotation has been reset, and our position has been reset. Overall, it's just nice to have normalized values, as when it comes to Unity, rotating with different scales along different axes can be quite messy. So make sure that all your models, before exporting, do have a scale of 1. So there we go. Now in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at Vertex Colors, okay? And this is basically going to allow us to apply colors to our mesh, okay? Without having to worry about using a texture. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then in the next lesson. Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how we can start to apply some color to our 3D model here. Now, the way we're going to be doing it in this lesson is by modifying the Vertex Colors. Now, you may have heard of using textures to apply color and detail to models, and that is a way that you can do it. For example, if you want to add text, if you want to add grain or other sort of visible detail, then textures are a great thing to use. Whereas if you're using low poly models, for example, and you just want nice flat shading on them, Vertex Colors are very good in that sense, because Vertex Colors have the color information baked into the mesh itself. Okay, you don't need an external texture file in order to apply to the mesh, so generally Vertex Colors are great in that way. Although if you do have much more complex meshes and that have different sorts of detail applied to them, then you'll probably want to use a texture. But in this case here, we can use Vertex Colors and they'll work just fine. So first of all, what we need to do is remove this default texture that is applied to our model right now. And as you can see, this is just the ProBuilder default texture. And we don't really want this because we're just gonna have a nice flat colored model right here. So what we need to do is create our new material. Each model has a material or multiple materials if you wish. So we're gonna create our own and override it. So down here in the assets window, I'm gonna create a new folder called materials. And I'm going to create a brand new material, and I'm going to call this one sword. Okay. Now what we need to do then is go over to the shader and change this from the standard Unity shader over to ProBuilder, which is here, and change this over to Diffuse Vertex Color. Okay, Diffuse Vertex Color basically means that we're going to be using Unity's lighting in order to determine the brightness of the model, and vertex color meaning that it is going to use the vertex colors in order to render basically the color of the faces. So what we can do then is just click and drag it onto the mesh like so, and it has been applied. So now we have this nice white plain sword ready to be colored. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our sword, and we're going to select all of the faces that we want to use for the blade. Okay, all the faces that we want to use to color the blade. So I'm going to select all of the faces right here. Okay, and then we are going to go over to the Vertex Colors selection right here. This is going to open up this window, which allows us to basically choose colors, of course. We can click, we can modify it like so, and then we can just click apply, and that color is going to be applied to that face. For example, we can have green, blue, red, but for us, we're going to choose white for the blade, okay? Now these colors here are only there as a color palette to use. For example, if you have a game with a consistent color palette, it'll be good to set them right here. Although the color information is going to be baked into the mesh. So for example, if I apply this white color and then I change this white color to black, the model is going to still stay white because that color information is not stored here in the color palette, rather it is stored in each vertice. So let's exit out of this right here, and as you can see, nothing's changed really because this is already a white mesh. But let's have a look at what vertex colors are. Basically, vertex colors are color information that is stored in each vertice. Okay, so our mesh is made up of a number of different vertices connecting together to form edges and connecting those together to form faces. And of course, a collection of faces then forms the final mesh right here. Now each vertice can hold a position information, okay, in order to basically make it a 3D object, and it can also hold color information. Now if this vertice here, this one, and this one have been set to be black, for example, then this mesh is going to be black, or this face right here is going to be black. Whereas if this top vertice is white and these two bottom vertices are black, then there's going to be a transition between the two. So let's have a look at how that works. I'm going to select both of these two bottom vertices. Okay, remember that all the vertices are currently white. Go Vertex Colors and apply these two as black. And as you can see, what happens now is that between the vertices that are black and white, there is a gradient, okay? It's basically interpolating between the black vertices and the white vertices in order to determine what color should be in between. Okay, so that's pretty much how vertex colors work. Basically, you can apply a color to a vertex and it then uses that information to determine what color the mesh is. We're going to make those white, of course, for our blade. And now let's work on setting up our hilt. So I'm going to go to face selection to make it a bit easier. Select all of the faces on our hilt right here. Okay, just like that. We can then go over to Vertex Colors, open that up, and I'm going to basically find a nice sort of brownish color here. Okay, a nice brownish gray, something like that. We can apply that color, and there we go. So now we have the hilt of our sword set up like that. And as a bit of a challenge, I want you to go ahead now and set up the handle here, but I want you to make this little bulb bit of our handle to be a different color, okay? So you'll have the main handle color here, and then a different color for the bottom part. Okay, so pretty much we are going to select all of the faces on the main handle part right here. Okay, just like that. and we can then choose a brown color that we are going to be using. So let's go for a nice deep saturated brown, apply that, there we go. Probably make that a bit lighter actually, something like that, there we go. And then for the bottom part, I'm going to make this a red, okay, so make it look like it is some expensive piece of jewelry that was attached to the sword. Just select all of these faces right here. Okay, there we go. And then these bottom ones as well. And then for this, we'll use this red color right here, apply that, and like this so. So yeah, that is just a look at how we can use Vertex Colors in order to quickly apply a color to our mesh inside of ProBuilder and pretty much any other 3D modeling software. So if you were to extract this model so if you were to export this model and then import it into Blender, Maya, etc., these Vertex Colors will carry over as they are built into the mesh itself. So thanks for watching, and in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at UV editing, okay? We're going to be looking at applying textures to this model instead of Vertex Colors, okay? One's not necessarily better than the other. They are just two different possibilities that you can use in order to add detail and color to your mesh. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be UV editing our sword model right here. We're going to be sort of converting this 3D model into a 2D foldout and then texturing it in order to give it some finer detail. So, first of all, we need to go through the process of UV unwrapping this 3D model in order to spread it along a 2D surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select our sword right here. I'm going to go over to the UV editor selection, open the UV editor window up, and as you can see right now, by default it might look like an absolute mess, okay? And that's understandable because we have been scaling, moving around various different bits of our 3D model, so it's gonna probably look something like this. But how do we fix it? Well, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go over to the scene view, press Ctrl 8, select all of the faces of our model. Make sure you do have face selection set right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our actions and I'm going to click on the fit UVs button right here. And what that's going to do is it's going to shrink them all down to a scale that's going to be pretty handy right here to fit our UV. Okay, so this little blue square is where our texture is going to fit. And what I'm going to do then is also go to where it says project UVs. Now, UV projection is basically a way of getting the rough dimensions of our faces in order to get the right proportions. So I'm going to click on box right here, and as you can see, we've got the rough shape and dimensions of our sword right now. Now what this basically means is if you get our sword right here and you put a 3D box around it, it's almost as if from each side of the box we are projecting our view onto the sword, and whatever we are looking at, that is sort of the frame at which we are capturing these faces at. So that's why the proportions may be a bit off due to perspective, but overall it should generally be fine. And you can of course go in and tweak them here. We're then going to click on fit UVs again to bring them down to scale here. And what we can do then is just manually go by hand now and move them over to different parts of the image. So at the top right corner here is where we're going to have our blade. So I'm going to select the faces of our blade right here. Drag them over, drag them over just like so. Maybe don't have them hugging the edges, just so we have a bit of leeway here. We can then do the other side of the blade, which is basically going to be a duplicate, but we are going to have that on a separate area, so we can drag that over as well, like here. Okay, and as you can see, what we're doing here is basically just getting the different faces, okay, and we are spreading them out along this image. So then what we can do is go into Photoshop or some other program and paint over this. And we can actually export a template which shows these white lines so we know where we're actually painting the texture. Okay, and then of course we do have these thin lines right here. Where are they? These thin little bits right here, which we can just select all of them. Like so. And now since these thin bits are basically not going to have any texture on them at all, what we can do is move them over here. I'm actually going to then scale these down really small and just put them inside of one of the blades here, okay? So whatever color this part of the blade is going to be the color of this, okay? Because we're not really going to have much fine detail on this part of the mesh. So we've got our blades. Then what we can do is we can set up the hilt right here. And the difference with the hilt and the blade is that the blade really only has 2 sides, whereas the hilt has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sides. That should be fairly easy. So we're going to select the front bit of the hilt here. We can move this up just about there. We can then get the back side of the hilt, which is pretty much going to be the exact same. Move that up like there. We can then get the top of the hilt right here. Move that over there. We can get the bottom. And yeah, basically all we're doing here is just dragging these parts around so they're not stacked on top of each other. And we are positioning them on our texture map right here. So you can of course go ahead, skip this part of the video to the to where we actually start the texturing. But we're going to get these little corner bits now, just like that, and bring them up here. And then for the handle, since this is a cylinder, it is split up a bit differently. So what we can do is we can select a face here. I'm going to drag this over here, select the, actually no. So what we're going to do with this cylinder is we are basically going to position them all next to each other so we have a nice rectangular image that we can sort of create a texture that goes across it all. So we'll start with this one right here. We'll drag it about there. Okay, so we've got all of these stuck together here. In fact, we probably don't want them overlapping, so we can just move them over a tiny bit. But one problem is that there are little gaps here, and trying to, figure out exactly where you should position them is going to be a bit hard. So what we can do is instead weld these together, so they're basically all automatically stuck next to each other. And the way we can do that is I'm just going to hold down Shift, select all of these, and I'm going to go over to where we have the weld button. And what weld does is it basically will look at where these edges are not connected, and it's going to basically bridge this connection. So if we click on weld, you'll see automatically all of these UVs have been connected together. So we can make a nice seamless texture going through these, okay? And now let's do the rest for this little ball over here. Now, if you have a UV like this, where the proportions are a bit off, as you can see here, these are all pretty much the same size rectangle, but they are just sort of curved around each other. But over here in the UV, it does give off this weird perspective. What you can do is you can select all of these like so, then click on weld. And then if we go over to the edge selection, we can select this edge right here and just line it up to where it makes all of these the same size. We can go Vertex Selection for this one, and yeah, just make sure that these are all in proportion like so, okay? And there you go. So we can then go ahead, place all these where they're necessary, and then continue on. And there we go. We have our complete UV map right here with all of the various different elements. So now what we can do is click on this camera icon, right? We can choose the image size. We'll keep everything as it is. And then let's click on Save UV Template, okay? We can then choose a location to save this file at. I'm just going to put it on my desktop here, and I'm just going to call this one Sword UV Template. So what we can do then is we can open up whatever software we are using and paint over the texture. And there we go. I've just gone ahead and created quite a basic texture. So now what we can do is go ahead and export this, import it into Unity, and we should be ready to go. So here inside of Unity, as you can see, we have our sword texture right here. I'm going to go ahead and create ourselves a brand. Actually, no, we're going to use the existing sword material right here, but we're just going to switch back to the standard shader, and we can assign that sword texture like so. And as you can see now, we have this texture applied. You can see all the detail. There's a bit of a problem here in the hilt, but we'll probably just add a bit more color there. So yeah, look at the texture, make sure there's no imperfections. If there are, like in the hilt here, you can of course go back and revise that texture. But as you can see, we've pretty much got UV mapping and texturing done for our sword, and it is now complete. Now the final step is to export it as a 3D model, and that's what we're going to be doing in the next lesson. So I'll see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be going over exporting our 3D model. Now, right now, inside of Unity, we can use this perfectly fine. If you want to go ahead, attach a collider or rigid body to this, you could do that. Although the downside is that it is still classified as a ProBuilder mesh, so there are certain limitations to what you can do. For example, here in the inspector, we have the ProBuilder mesh filter, not the normal mesh filter. And this is good if you're still working on the 3D model and you want to open it up in ProBuilder and modify it there. But generally, once you've done creating your 3D model, it's good to export it because later down the line, you can use it in other projects, you can import it into other pieces of software, and you can even import it into other 3D modeling programs in order to modify it there as well. So how do we export this as a 3D model and begin using it inside of Unity? Well, over here, we want to select our model and then go over to export. Let's click on this little plus next to export, and it's going to open up this options window. Now, the main option here is probably going to be export format. This is just going to be the type of file that is being exported. I recommend just exporting it as OBJ because that is the file format that's used by pretty much every piece of software. So it'll be pretty safe by going OBJ. And then there's a bunch of options down here. Now, the options down here, first of all, include children. If you have any children objects of sword, so if you have other ProBuilder models that are a child of it, for example, that will export those as well. We don't have any, so we can just leave it as false. Export as group is if you have multiple 3D models selected, you can export those as a group. Apply transforms, this just applies any of the transform component, position, rotation, or scale values to your 3D model. We'll just leave that as false right now since we don't really need to bring any of these over. Right-handed, this is basically there for if you want to export this as a right-hand or left-handed coordinate system. We'll just keep it as right-hand for now. Copy textures, we want to bring the textures over. Vertex colors, if you have any vertex colors, you can enable that. Texture offset and scale, we don't really have any texture offset or scaling done to that, so we can leave that as false. And export quads, because since a mesh is broken up into triangles, that is how everything is rendered at the final step of the rendering process. But when 3D modeling, it's generally useful to model in terms of quads or rectangles. As you can see here, pretty much everything we're doing is in terms of rectangles. Okay, each face has 4 sides, and export quads basically means that these quads are going to be exported rather than it being divided up into individual triangles. This doesn't really matter that much, so I recommend just keeping export quads on. Then we can click on the export button right here, and we can choose a location to save this model. So I'm going to create a brand new folder called models, and inside of here we are going to create our sword model. Save that there, and here it is. So we can exit out of this window now. We can just disable our sword for now, so we don't have that there. And over in our models folder, we have a few things. Okay, first of all, we have the sword model itself. So if we look at it here, there it is with the texture applied. You can modify any of the import settings just as you would a normal 3D model inside of Unity. We have the sword texture being carried over as well as a material file, which just defines the material being applied to our sword. So we can get our sword, drag it into the scene, and there it is, okay? So yeah, that is pretty much how we can export our ProBuilder model and save it as an OBJ file, for example. So yeah, just like any other piece of software as well, it does save it in the exact same way, so don't worry about that. And of course, later down the line, if you do want to use this in any other sort of game or any other sort of game engine, you can go ahead and copy these 3 files and they should work just fine, as .obj is generally the most universal file type in comparison to something like FBX, for example. So yeah, you can go ahead then, attach a collider to this, chuck it in your game just as you would normally, and you are ready to go. So yeah, that is just a look at ProBuilder and all the various different things that we can do with it. We've gone ahead, we've created the sword, we've applied vertex colors, we've done texturing, we've done modeling, all the various different tools here inside of ProBuilder as well. There are many other different things here inside of ProBuilder, so I recommend if you want to learn the nitty gritty, experiment with it or go do some research on the documentation. So, thank you for watching.